supposed to start at 4. So in first in the nation primary time, this is early, right? You all know that, right? Because you're all experienced New Hampshire hands. We're still awaiting her arrival. She should be here momentarily. Thank you all for your patience. I think that's the greatest greeting anyone's ever gotten in this bookstore.
Thank you.
Good evening, or good afternoon. My name's Dan Chartrand. I'm the owner and founder of Water Street Bookstore. I want to welcome you all here. The mission of the bookstore is to build community around the written word, and we're right on mission right now, so thank you all for helping us do that. I just want to introduce someone who needs no introduction, author, activist, and invoker of our better angels, Marianne Williamson.
Wish that I was here to ask for your vote, but I, as I'm sure you know, had to suspend my campaign the other day. This is a big business running for president, and we did not have the machine or the monetary resources to drive this home over this next month. So I did have to suspend my campaign. Much to my disappointment, and I'm extremely grateful to all of the people here in New Hampshire and around the country who have supported this campaign. While I'm sorry that I was not able to create the appropriate vase, we have the flowers. And the issues that I felt strongly about, that were the inspiration and the motivation for me to run to begin with, I care about as much today as I cared about then. I asked when I announced my campaign 1 year ago, I said, please join with me so that we can talk about things that matter. And to the best of my ability, we have done that. And I feel that there has been a listening for that. And I feel as strongly as ever, the American people are ready to evolve this country. The American people are ready to take things forward. And I believe that there is a constituency for that. I believe that it can be harnessed. It will not be harnessed this year in the container, which is a Marianne Williamson for President campaign. However, the evolution that we're talking about is much bigger than any one person. And it's much bigger than any one form. It is content, it is not form. And that content matters as much today as it mattered last week or the week before that. In a way, I am here today to pass the baton to you. Power in America works both ways. It works both in candidates and political leaders who bring forth issues, and it also works from the bottom up, which is citizens demanding that certain issues be dealt with. And one of the things that drove me to run, and about which I think we should all be concerned, is that we have become Stepford citizens. Now, I remember when I was young, we had this book, Stepford Wives, which is like going around like this. I think that Americans have lost our rambunctiousness. It disturbs me sometimes when I only see it on the far right. What has happened to us? I thought there was a big hell no built into things in New Hampshire, of all places. It is, you know, the older I get, it's interesting, the older I get, the more profound I realize our founders were in their insistence that the only safe place for the repository of power is in the hands of the people. And in many ways we have, I believe, at least unconsciously conspired with our own disempowerment. Because the political establishments and institutions have seemed so because they are material, because they are dense and they have money behind them and they have all the materiality behind them, pose as the power. But they're not the power. The power is our ideas and our demands and our emotional and psychological connection to the principles on which this country stands. And that has to do, first and foremost, with America's mission statement. And that, of course, as we know, is the Declaration of Independence. But the Declaration of Independence, while we revere it collectively, and we have those principles inscribed on marble walls and written on parchment somewhere, if those principles are not alive in our hearts, then they lose their moral force. They become deadened. In the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. Well, I think every generation of Americans must rediscover our own psychological and emotional connection to the principles on which we stand. If we lose that psychological and emotional connection, then even if legally we still have the power itself begins to dissolve. Because when you're not clear who you are in relationship to the system, and what your power is within the system, and what your own personal dedication is to that system in order to protect that system from any enemies and to bequeath that system to your children, when you lose that in your gut, you become easy to play. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, we have been played. It's the 11th hour, but it is not midnight yet. So in the next month in New Hampshire, this is a perfect example. I'm here to talk to you about what I believe are the issues that constitute a season of repair in America. You see, if the Democratic candidate runs only on policies, Donald Trump will find a way to shoot them down. What you can't shoot down is a holistic vision. You can't shoot down a vision. It will be like David and Goliath. Goliath was blinded, and he can't hit what he can't see. If you're talking traditional political strategy, they'll hit at it. But if you're talking about something that's bigger than that calls people to a higher place, they can't hit at it because it's beyond their radar. But what's most important, however, is not the political strategy involved there. What's most important is that it's the right thing to do. And in everything in life, whether it has to do with our individual behavior or whether it has to do with our politics, you do the right thing and the strategy will emerge from that. Right? So I am hoping that in the things that I talk to you about today, you yourselves, to the extent to which you feel they're important, you yourself, when you go hear the various candidates that will be in New Hampshire this month, will not just take what they say is important, but you will tell them what you think is important. People have asked me if I am going to endorse a candidate. I want to endorse these issues. I want to endorse these policies. I want to endorse things. It is my hope that these issues will find seed. They've already found seed in other people's language. That has been true from the beginning. Yeah. But I hope that they will find seed in other people's policies. And that's what I meant by saying I'm here to pass the baton to you. Mm-hmm. I believe that the United States needs a season of moral repair. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, let me tell you what I've learned about this entire political landscape since beginning my campaign a year ago. The system is even more corrupt than I feared, and the people of the United States are even more wonderful than I knew. And the people of the United States, one of the things, my father was a lawyer, and my father used to say when I was a child, always talk to the smartest person on the jury. You need to always talk to the smartest person on the jury. And I have found throughout my career, for 35 years, that the best thing to do is just talk to the smartest, talk at the highest gradient. I find American politics, it's very paternalistic towards the American people. It infantilizes us. It treats us like we're stupid. And that is actually their operating principle, that they think that they're going to win by talking to the 14-year-old in all of us. The problem with that is that this is one of the most, it could be argued even the most critical moment in American history. This is the time for us to be mature adults and deep thinkers. Right. And that's what politics should be right now. Our politics should not be a container for superficiality. Our politics should be a container for deep thought and serious, sober reflection on what is going on here. Now, this is the deal. I have learned from my experience of my own career that when things go wrong, that's sometimes when we find out how intelligent we are. Let me give you an example. I've worked for 35 years up close and personal with people who were in trouble. They had just received the diagnosis and it's cancer. They've learned that their child is addicted and it's heroin, whatever it is. And what I have seen over and over is that when you receive really bad news or you recognize something that's really seriously challenging, there's something that happens in the first 10 minutes. And that's that all meaningless preoccupations fall away. And that's sometimes when you find out how smart you are. And you think seriously because this is not a joke. This is not a joke, what's happening in this country. And there's not one political savior. And new paradigm leadership for the 21st century isn't even about a political savior. New paradigm leadership has to do with the leader being one who holds the space for the genius of others. And that, as a matter of fact, goes back to the whole Jeffersonian concept, that that's how it was supposed to be anyway. But too many of us have become, at least on some level, chronically disengaged from politics. Now, look, if you don't take care of your marriage, if you don't tend to it, you just might lose your marriage. And if you don't tend to your health, you just might lose your health. And if you don't tend to your business, you might lose your business. I think a lot of us are awakening to the fact that we did not tend to our democracy. In many cases, we farmed out our best thinking about it. We assumed other people were political. You know, people say, I'm not political. You're at the effect of politics, whether you are recognizing that or not. So if we farmed it out, other people will handle it. Well, guess what? They did. They sure did. And now we are where we are, 11th hour, but not midnight yet. Part of the problem that I want to speak to real quickly before we move on from that is that when I say that Americans became chronically disengaged, too many people in America became chronically disengaged from politics over the last few decades. What's really sad is that some of the people America most needs to be involved in politics have become chronically disengaged from politics. Many of those people are the people who have the most sensitive, the most forward-thinking, the most socially enlightened perspectives on life, but did not feel that politics was a container for their view of the world. So America went forward and politics remained back in the 20th century somewhere. Many of us thought that was okay. We would make the change happen in education. We would make the change happen in business. We would make the change happen in health and wellness. We would make the change happen in whatever field we were involved in. But I think many people have awakened to the fact that as two lines from Gandhi come to mind. Gandhi said, anybody who thinks religion doesn't have anything to do with politics doesn't understand religion. And also when someone said to him, you're such a spiritual man, how could you be involved in politics? He said, is not politics a part of Dharma too? For those of us who come at things from a spiritual or a religious sense of inspiration and devotion, these are the last people who should be sitting out the great political and social and economic questions of our day. Because if you know what changes one heart, you're the one who knows what would really change the world. People who have a dedication to an unfoldment of things that is organic, that arises from deep within us, that arises from a sense of alignment with our deeper values and our deeper devotion to love, to the amelioration of human suffering, to the upliftment of humanity. We should not be on the periphery. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. And by the way, I remind you that no state in the Union has laid down what I just said more than New Hampshire has. The abolitionist movement arose from the early evangelicals in New Hampshire. That's where it came from. So with all the great social justice movements in this country, the greatest social justice movements arose from spiritual foundations. It was the early evangelicals in New Hampshire. It was the early Quakers also many, one of the whole issue of Quakers, I don't know if there are any Quakers in the room, but the whole involvement of the Quakers throughout our history, from our founding, in the evolution of America in the highest way, it's a great untold story of the role that the Quakers have played. Many of the leaders of the suffragette movement were Quakers, and then of course Dr. King, the civil rights movement, was led by a Baptist preacher, right? A Baptist preacher on the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So this idea that the too many in the political establishment have created, and I think if you followed my campaign, you see how that went down. The idea that anybody who is coming from any kind of a spiritual basis is not to be allowed. That's a lane. We're not to allow that. Whatever. I simply submit to you that that's the aberration. That the most traditional thing in America is that the voices of spirit, the voices of conscience, and the voices of love are in fact those voices that correct the course of this nation when this nation has gone astray. Now, the American people are fine. I don't think the problem is with the American people. Even if you look at the polls about where we are on issues, the American people are a little bit left of center. We're more of a progressive nation than not. And when you look at where the American people line up on the issues, we want to do right by people. That's not where the problem is. And I believe that the average American person does seek to live a life that is guided by the dictates of their conscience. I do believe that. I believe that the average American is a good and decent, dignified individual. I'm not saying we're better than people in other countries. I don't believe that. But we're good people, and we try to live good lives. That's not where the problem is. The problem is the divergence, in some instances even tragic divergence, between the conscience that guides the American people and the heartlessness that too often guides American public policy. The idea of a representative government is that government would be representing the quote-unquote will of the people. So when democracy works, that's good, because you're voting from your conscience what you think would be best, and then the elected representatives express that in public policy, and theoretically all would be great. But what has happened over the last 40 years is that our government has been hijacked. Our government has been hijacked by an amoral economic theory, really, of trickle-down economics. We could go into so many detours about it, but it doesn't matter. It wasn't promulgated by bad people. As a matter of fact, Milton Friedman, who was the main articulator of trickle-down economics, himself said that the only way it would work, and it would be safe, is if there was a universal basic income. They just left that part out. The point for us at this point is to recognize what happened here. So what happened is that this theory, which was backed by billions and billions of dollars by some very right-wing billionaires, etc., the idea is that market principles, completely untethered to any moral or ethical consideration, should be the guiding principle for American civilization. Now notice, I didn't say immoral, I said amoral. And that's significant because it's not about bad people. It's about a corrupt system. It's an amoral thought system, but it gives rise to immoral consequences.
That's right, yes, yeah, absolutely.
And what it did was it was arguing that government should get out of the way, and that the role of government should be to advocate for policies that support the ability of huge corporations to increase the short-term profits for their stockholders. Now, the idea was that that would be good for everybody. Because even though only a few people would make huge amounts of money, it would be good because they would create jobs. And because they would create jobs, all the money would trickle down and it would lift all boats. It's been 40 years. And I think the jury is in on this. It not only did not lift all boats, it drowned people. It has left millions of people without even a life vest. It has destroyed America's middle class. It has created a huge transfer of wealth, a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a very few Americans, to the point where 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. This is what we call income inequality. Now, this is the deal. Shortly, well, in the longer scheme of things, 10 or 15 years is shortly. Within 10, 15, certainly 20 years after the advent of this economic theory, money became an influence in Washington unlike any other time in our history. First of all, by the Supreme Court saying that money is free speech, and then most recently by the Citizens United decision giving corporations unlimited ability to wield influence in Washington. What that created was a system that we basically have now. And this is what I mean by saying this is time for us to be very serious adults. Our government has become a system of legalized bribery.
Absolutely.
And when Abraham Lincoln stood on the battlefield in Gettysburg, and he said that those men who died there had given what he called the last full measure of devotion, he said, in order that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. So you and I, and you're citizens of New Hampshire. This is serious. This is not about anybody else getting it. This is about you getting it. This is about all of us getting it. We are no longer a government of the people and by the people and for the people. It is perishing. And it is perishing on our watch. We are a government of huge major multinational corporate interests, by huge multinational corporate interests, and for huge multinational corporate interests. The political status quo, that fact is entrenched in our political status quo. It is naive of us. It is irresponsible of us. It is immature of us to believe that the political status quo is going to disrupt this situation. The political status quo lives to perpetuate itself. It does not live to disrupt itself. Too much money is involved. So what has happened is that we have reverted. Just like an individual can revert or regress, our government has regressed to what is essentially an aristocratic system, right? So we're not of the people, by the people, for the people. We're of, by, and for a few of the people. Isn't that what we repudiated in 1776? Yep. Isn't that what we said hell no to? Isn't that what the Declaration of Independence was signed in order to repudiate it? Well, I'd like to submit to you, my fellow Americans, it's time to repudiate it again. Given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, we will not be able to override Citizens United anytime soon, but you need your candidate to make sure that they commit, that they will, as one of the first things they do in office, one of the first things that they do is to submit to Congress legislation for the establishment of public funding for all federal campaigns. We will not be able to deal with this until we realize that the undue influence of money on our politics, this is the cancer underlying all the other cancers. Whether it is health insurance companies or big pharmaceutical companies or gun manufacturers or chemical companies or food companies or oil and gas or agribusiness or defense contractors. As long as our government is as it is now, so under the sway of the economic influence of these forces, nothing will ultimately change. And if you have candidates who are just talking about changing a policy here or changing a policy there, that's treating the symptom. We must recognize the deeper disease. And ultimately we will need not only that legislation to establish public funding, we will also need a constitutional amendment. Now, what I hope you will make clear, if you agree with me, are the following things in terms of the candidates that you speak for. And most of them, a lot of these will be articulated by other Democratic candidates. Some won't be. But I hope I can convince you that they should be. And you'll make sure that I would, if you agree with me, that this will influence your vote. Number one, we need to repeal that 2017 $2 trillion tax cut. 83 cents of every dollar. 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations. the middle class part of it should be put back in. The middle class part of it was a good idea to begin with. Next thing we need to do is to remove those corporate subsidies. $26 billion alone went to oil and gas last year. Next thing we need to do is to insist that the U.S. government be able to negotiate for lower drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies. One of the things I knew before I began my campaign for the presidency, but boy, I really know it now, it is unbelievable the codependent relationship that the American people have with Big Pharma. It is unbelievable. And then if you don't toe the line, Big Pharma comes after you. And I know this in every cell of my being. Next thing we need to do is to recognize, as I look at it, and this is of course for you, all of this goes without saying, is for you to decide for yourselves. I believe that the American military, the U.S. military, should receive every dollar that it needs in order to secure our security, to secure our safety. And that, of course, should be the people and the president who decide exactly what we think that is. However, we need to wake up, Americans, because at the moment, our national security agenda is not driven, and certainly our military budget is not driven only by what the military says that they need. It is driven to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars above that by short-term profit maximization for defense contractors. The military-industrial complex drives the foreign policy of the United States of America. This must stop. If we do those things plus, and I also agree with the wealth tax concept, I do agree with the idea of 3% tax on the assets of billionaires. I think it's also important to realize how many billionaires agree with that. Because let's be real, you say to a billionaire, I want 3%, they'll never even feel it. And then you say to people, $50 million and over, I think it is totally reasonable to ask for 2%. You're going to do those things, and we're going to have some cash on hand. And then with that cash on hand, it is time for the moral repair of this country. Yes. As I said before, the problem is not that the American people are not good. The problem is that our public policy is too often not good. For instance, they're really big these days on talking about how our economy is really so good. You cannot say to me, I'm sorry, I'm a philosopher. Don't try to pull any wool over my eyes when it comes to the word good. Okay? The word good is really important to me. When you have 93 million people living near poverty, when you have 13 million children who are hungry, and I remind you that in northern New Hampshire, 25% of the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. When you have those facts plus 100,000 homeless children in America, don't you dare try to tell me that our economy is good. It's a lot of things, but it's not good. It is abundant for a particular class of people. And then you have millions and millions of other people who have been convinced over the years that if it's good for that small class, somehow it will one day be better for them. So the entire paradigm of economic abundance needs to shift. We have been trained to believe, see, this is the value of being older. This is the value of being older, because some of us remember what it was like before the 80s, right? And I'm not saying it was perfect, but we knew enough that we would laugh at this. We would laugh at this. So what we've been trained to believe is that money is made by a few corporate chieftains who are, many of whom are nice people, by the way. This is not about good people versus bad people. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. Not every poor person is noble and pure. This is not about a good versus bad people in any way, shape, or form. This is about systems that have been corrupted. So the economic theory that we have is the idea that a few corporate chieftains would drop crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. And then the average American is turned into a, please sir, could you maybe make a job for me? It's so paternalistic. No, stop it, just get it out of your consciousness. That is not how we should look at money. Money does not come from a few very, very, very rich people who might, in their largesse, create jobs for you. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. That's where money And the view of the American people, as I see it, in our hearts, is basically this. or should be anyway. Certainly I believe that it's what a lot of people would say if they had the words with which to say it. Basically, the view of the average American to their government, in my opinion, should be this. Give me free health care, give me a good education, and give me a fair shot. I'll create my own damn career. Give me the knee. Get your boot off my neck. That's what this country was founded on. All public policy should be guided by one core principle, and it's not short-term profit maximization for huge corporate entities. The core principle that should guide all American public policy should be, what is it that would help a person thrive?
Yes.
Public policy should support your dreams, not thwart your dreams. I see some young people in this room. This is, in my opinion, what the relationship should be between young people and your government. Because we seem to have forgotten this country belongs to you. Once you forget that, they can take it from you easy because you don't even realize it was taken. Right? So this, to me, should be the arrangement between the government and a young person. I'm looking at a young person right now. I want you to have free health care because I don't even want you to have to think about it. I want you to have free education because I don't even want you to have to think about it. I want to remove whatever college loans you have because I don't even want you to have to think about it. But there's a quid pro quo there. What I want you to do is make something of your life. I want you to take that investment that this country is making in you and become the woman and actualize the God-given potential that lies within you. To be appreciative of the fact that you live in a country that supports you in doing that. Be an amazing woman. Be an amazing wife, be an amazing girlfriend, be an amazing friend, be an amazing lover, be an amazing mother, be an amazing business person, be an amazing artist, be an amazing scientist, be whatever your dreams are. Because if you do that, if you spread your wings and soar, that is how America will soar. Politicians used to always use the phrase peace and prosperity. And I asked myself, well, why don't they use that phrase anymore? And my first thought was, oh, Marianne, there you go, I'm being a little old-fashioned again. That's a little quaint, peace and prosperity. Then I realized that's not why they don't use it. It's because that's not the goal anymore. Because if the goal is prosperity, oh, that's a whole different thing. The goal of prosperity, for instance, and that takes me to my next issue. If you want an amazingly prosperous society 10, 15 years from now, you know what you do? Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. What I have learned working with people, particularly people in trouble, is if you've got a crisis on your hands, the first place you have to look is in the mirror. You have to be willing to take a good look at yourself. Where are you not who you say you are? Where are you not living the principles that you say you believe in? Where do you need to atone? Where do you need to make an amends? Where do you need to change? Because it's kind of like when a car goes into a skid, and that's what's happening in America today. It's like when a skid. And all these people are telling you what they will do if you give them the wheel. But everybody knows, no, take your hands off the wheel and let nature knows how to handle this. But nature handles things when you go back to values and principles. There is no greater. There is no more egregious. There is no more immoral. There is no more intolerable or unacceptable breach between who we are as people and how we are behaving as a nation than the fact that millions of American children are underserved, at risk, and live with chronic trauma because they are not being rescued from their situations. And because these children aren't old enough to vote, they're not a constituency, they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any economic clout. I want to repeat what I said to you a few minutes ago because I hope all of you are horrified by this. 25% of all the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. We have throughout this country elementary school students on suicide watch. Something that's become very common in American schools is what's called trauma rooms. The chronic trauma of American children is so far beyond anything that our current infrastructure, such as the Department of Education and the Health and Human Services, can even begin to absorb. The people must demand this. I understand that helping a 10-year-old child does not make any corporate profits. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make corporate profits. By the way, when we're talking about the corporate profits that guide American policy, it means only short term. You don't talk about long-term money. Think of every kindergartner in America. Because if you want to talk about the potential entrepreneurial genius of this country, that's where it is, in the brain of every kindergartner. If you want to talk about an amazing 21st century, and that's what you and I should be talking about right now. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to navigate these turbulent times and open ourselves up to the most amazing 21st century? Right now, we have young people. I want to ask you a question. How many people in this room have either said or heard a young person say, I don't think I'm going to have children because I just don't see how I can make it work, or I just don't see where the future is, so I don't think I'm going to have it. How many of you, please raise your hands. Can we please have an adult moment? That is so aberrational. We are frogs in very hot water, not registering what's happening here. What you just said, what you just showed me, which I see everywhere I go, is aberrational. It's one thing that some people just don't feel, I don't want to have kids. That's always been true, and that's fine, that's good. Some people, I've been hearing the vegans say for years, that's even natural, because this is different. And look how many of you raise your hands, and that is because we have an instinctive understanding. We are way too close to the cliff here. Now, what we need to do is to realize that we must get busy, and we must get busy now, not later. You know, many people told me about my campaign. If I get one more text saying I elevated the conversation, ladies and gentlemen, or people telling me you're the future, I don't know how much time you think we have. This is not about elevating our conversation, this is about elevating our country. And by the way, this is a lot bigger than just defeating Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not create all these problems created Donald Trump. If you buy into a conversation that everything's going to be fine as long as we defeat Donald Trump, we will not go over the cliff this year, but we will still remain way too close to the cliff. We will still be in the vicinity of the cliff. They have many people lined up behind him. There will be other people coming in to take up that space in the midterms in 22 and in the presidential election of 24. We have to go deeper. We have to talk about root cause. We have to do what we're doing here today, which is getting real. Getting real. This country needs to look in the mirror. All of the Democratic candidates are telling you the truth. I'm not saying they're lying to you. But what I'm saying is that it's not enough to just tell the truth right now. We need to do what you do in a court of law, tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And the political establishment does not want us to look at the deepest truth, does not want us to look at the deepest root causes because of how often the political establishment is the root cause. Millions of underserved children, these millions of at-risk children, these millions of chronically traumatized children, this should not be happening. But I'll tell you something, if you want to talk about the fuel that would generate the most amazing chapter in American history on the other side of this one, the power to fuel that is not in the sun, it's not in the wind, it's not anywhere under the ground, it's in the brain of every child. What we now know about the brain of early childhood. Every time we fail to do everything possible to help a small child actualize their God-given potential on top of everything else, we're leaving money on the table. Because think about it. We have millions of American children right now who go to school in classrooms where they do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Where are these kids going to be in 20 years? And think of the money that you're putting that you're leaving on the table. Do any of you ever watch that show, Lock Up? You know, if you have had any experience in the American with the in prison system, you meet people in there, and you go, "What are you doing here? Oh my God, how did you end up here? It wasn't supposed to be this way." And you just recognize how much early childhood in America has become saturated by some societal dysfunctions and pathologies that are so great that it is almost predictable that the level of societal pathology that emerges from it, it is, like I said, is almost predictable. We must end the immoral way that we have of basing our educational funding primarily on property taxes. This is wrong. That means rich kids get a good education, poor kids don't necessarily get a good education. This is a form of passive oppression. So what I stood for in my campaign, and what I hope that you will stand on as well when you talk to other candidates, is a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. What I wanted was an establishment of a Department of Children and Youth. We need way more. Do we need better educational funding? That goes without saying, but it goes even beyond that. We need trauma-informed education. We need community wraparound services. We need mental health services for children and for their families. We need nutrition, and we need to realize that many of these children are traumatized even before preschool. The next pillar of moral repair that I want to talk to you about is war and peace. Obviously, right now, we see what's happening with Iran. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here exactly what is going on. But once again, it's not only on the level of symptom. It's not only on the level of the fact that we should never have left the Iran nuclear deal. It's not only on the level of the fact that that only strengthened the hardliners in Iran and made them even more active in Iraq. It's beyond the fact that by assassinating Soleimani, we actually made him more dangerous in death than he was in life, which is why the Obama administration and the Bush administration had chosen not to take him out. It goes beyond the violence, and I hope all of you will realize economic sanctions are an act of violence. They are violence. And I am not saying that sanctions never have a place in American as a tool in American foreign policy, because in some cases where they have to do with sanctions so that certain leaders or oligarchs can't get into their Swiss bank accounts, that can be very good. But the sanctions such as those that we have already placed on Iran, the sanctions, we did the same thing in Venezuela. It is an act of violence towards people. It does not hurt the government, it hurts the people. And the theory is, well, if you hurt the people enough, the people will rise up against their government. But the issue is, in these cases, the people know it wasn't their governments who did this. They know in so many of these cases. So what's happening after when the president withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, he even tightened the sanctions, made the sanctions worse against the Iranian people. And just yesterday, I mean, there were so many sanctions that people were having a very difficult time already. Now they will even have more so. Be very clear what sanctions mean. It means people cannot feed their children. It means people cannot get their medicine. It means people can't get their insulin. They can't get their AIDS medicine. They can't have access. Today I was reading, it's the new ones they've done are on textiles. So I was just thinking of some company in Iran, some people trying to sell cloth, right? I mean, the things that become, we have been led into a period of time where we talk about political issues without bringing in our hearts, without bringing in our souls, without bringing in our deep humanity. And that's what's happening here. These public policies are so soulless. And you saw this with what's happened. Oh, well, we're not having military hostilities against Iran. Trust me, we're still having hostilities. And sanctions is a hostile act. Now, what I wanted, what I stood for, what I hope, once again, in terms of passing the baton to you, what I hope that you will bring up with other candidates, what about a Department of Peace? I take great pleasure in the thought that there are going to be candidates throughout New Hampshire and other places who are going to be challenged by people who say, well, you know, Marianne talked about the primaries. I go, oh, that's inconvenient. I continue to speak as I feel that I'm inconvenient to all the right people. So this is pleasant. Just for you to have an idea of where your money goes. In the National Defense Authorization Bill that was passed by the House only 2 weeks ago, there was $738 billion. Now, basically our budget for defense is $760 billion. Your budget for your State Department, I hope you all remember this is your money. State Department is $40 billion. Within the State Department, there is the USAID, which is humanitarian and long-term aid assistance, and that gets $17 billion. And then you have $1 billion over that, a little less than $1 billion, that goes to peace building. I want everyone here to be really clear what peace building is. It's just, peace building is to war what the health and wellness space is to medicine and to sickness. You don't just take medicine, you cultivate health. And we can't just be prepared for war, we need to cultivate peace. Even Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense under George Bush, said we must learn to wage peace. So right now, we spend an inordinate amount of money on ways to prepare for war compared to far too little money on things that wage peace. And that is what the peace building community does. The 4 major factors of peace building are expanded economic opportunities for women, expanded educational opportunities for children, expanded a reduction of violence against women, and the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. Anytime you ameliorate human suffering, you increase statistically the incidence of peace and decrease the incidence of conflict. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether it's a corner of the city of American City and gangs, or it's a corner of the world where there is a terrorist organization. And that's why the idea of a Department of Peace was very important to me. In my campaign, we should have a peace academy, a peace-building academy, just like we have a military academy. But in this issue, much like with the children, it takes some new thinking. Right now, what is being presented by the political establishment are the completely dysfunctional versus the less dysfunctional policies, but all that keep it within where we are already. And then that same system has the audacity to claim that only people whose careers have been entrenched within that system that drove us into this ditch are qualified to leave us out of the ditch. Don't buy it, New Hampshire. The other issue I hope that you will bring up with candidates, it was very much a part of my campaign. My campaign stood for what I call the whole health plan. Now, my health care plan did talk about a public option, I believe an option, and because the regular Medicare, for me, in my opinion, it's an inflexible situation. You're definitely going to be treated, but you're going to be treated how they say you're going to be treated, and if you don't like it, too bad. What my option meant, first of all, everybody gets covered, but secondly, we have such dominance of big pharmaceutical companies in our medical schools right now, that what happens is if you go to a doctor normally today, very few doctors received any training in the relationship between food and health beyond one semester's course, right? So we now have all kinds of scientifically established results where there are dietary changes and lifestyle changes that are every bit as efficacious, sometimes even more efficacious, at treating and even reversing disease. So number one, the U.S. government should be compensating. There should not be this dominance of big pharma in our medical school training. And also in my plan, I'm going to leave this stuff up. I hope you'll go to Marianne2020.com. And in my plan, it talks about how part of a patient's Bill of Rights would be that if you go to a doctor and you get diagnosed, and the doctor gives you a prescription that is pharmaceutical and or surgical, that it is mandated that you also be informed of any scientifically established results that are produced by dietary and or lifestyle changes, which would be just as efficacious, and punchline, insurance has to pay for that. The others, I think, are fairly obvious. One, and I certainly think that there are other Democratic candidates who agree on this one. Many of us are very aware we have a climate emergency on our hands. We absolutely must take radical action within the next 7 years. There has to be a World War II mass mobilization to reverse climate change. If we do not do that, we could have levels of mass social collapse over the next 20 years that are beyond anything that we have seen in the modern era. Also, I believe that all that a nation is people. Same psychological and emotional issues that prevail within the journey of one person prevail within the journey of a nation. And so, for a person, but also for a country, you're not going to have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to pay reparations for slavery. We don't really need a lot more evidence. We really don't need another study. We kind of know what happened. So real quickly, let me be really clear with you. And black people in the room are very clear about these dates and these times and these facts. But just in case anybody isn't clear, it's worth noting. Number one, first slave ships brought over here in 1619. Slavery was not abolished until 1865. That's almost 250 years. That was followed, except for a very short period of time, by what was essentially another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people in the United States. What do you call lynchings if not domestic terrorism? What do you call the Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terrorism? At the end of slavery, historians now believe that there were between 4 and 5 million people who were, at that point, formerly enslaved. Tecumseh Sherman, Northern General, promised to every former slave family of 4 40 acres and a mule, which, if you think about it, once again, we've all heard that phrase, but think about what that would have meant. You're told you're not a slave anymore. Your parents were slaves, your grandparents were slaves, unto generations going back 250 years. You're told you're not a slave anymore. Where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? 40 acres and a mule would have meant you could start over. Okay? That promise was rescinded, followed by the 100 years of segregation as we know. It took 100 years from the end of slavery to dismantle segregation through the Civil Rights Act, and then the following year the Voting Rights Act, which gave black people, and thus all Americans, the opportunity to equal access to the polls. That itself started being chipped away at in 2013, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts in our lives now. The issue of the economic gap that existed at the end of the Civil War has never been fully addressed. Now, Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. It didn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. It is time for the United States to do the same. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed what was called the American Civil Liberties Act, where Japanese people who had been interned in the internment camps during World War II, every surviving prisoner was given between $20,000 and $22,000. So by the middle of the 20th century, even in this country, the recognition that financial remuneration is appropriate when one nation has wronged another nation was not seen as a fringe concept. It should not be seen as a fringe concept today. With World War II ending in 1945, and you have as much as has been cleaned up between Germany and the Jews. I mean, they certainly have some anti-Semitism problems going on in Europe now, but that is not based on the Holocaust. That's coming from another issue, as we know. We had this, our Civil War was ended in 1865. What we continue to do is pass this toxic baton, generation after generation after generation. And what I was running for president because it is time to end one chapter of American history. It is time to end things sometimes in order to open yourself up to a new one. Now, I'm very grateful. I had this, I think I covered all 6 pillars, didn't I? Is there anything, would you look at that 6 pillars on my website real quick? Did I leave anything out? Now, this is the deal. I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. And I had this date. I'm very grateful to the bookstore. Thank you, Dan, for allowing me. Also, I'll tell you something else. One of the things about me that was one of the many, she's just trying to sell books, which is almost a joke, because the truth of the matter is when you're actually a candidate, you can't even talk about your books, because it could be seen as trying to use the resources of the campaign to sell your book. But I'm not running! Please look at my book. And all the damage of that book and the value of the book is that it explains what you're talking about. I assume you have my book. Do you have Politics of Love here?
We have a few.
Okay, so Politics of Love is the book that I wrote that actually goes into quite a bit of detail on all of those things. And once again, were my motivation for wanting to run. And I hope that these are issues that you will bring up. I hope whether it's from the book or, like I said, my website, I will keep up the website. Did you see anything, Wendy? Did you look at the 6 pillars, please? Or will somebody just give me then, go to Marianne 2020 so I can see the 6 pillars? I'm just afraid I went to 5. I'm not sure we did the 6th one.
Economic justice one?
Economic justice, I think I did with all that stuff. And obviously, I think there should be free healthcare. And as I said, I think that there should be free college. And I think that we should absolutely remove those college loans. This is so ridiculous, people talking about how we don't have the money to remove those college loans. All these young people want to do, and obviously there are some older people too. Some of that college loan debt, that $1.5 trillion college loan debt, is in the hands of baby boomers. At what point do you get to relax? And they say we don't have the money to remove those college loans. Well, let me tell you how I look at it. You got a $1.5 trillion college loan debt. You got a $2 trillion tax cut for the very richest. Trade you. So it all goes back into where money comes from.
Animal protection.
Pardon?
Animal protection?
I do talk about animal protection. One of the things we absolutely need to do is to absolutely end the immoral practice of those animal factory farms. Also, one of the things that's terrible. One of the things that I talked about on the debate stage, once again, is the idea that you can't just treat sickness. You have to we have to ask ourselves, why are Americans so sick? Why do we have such a higher level of chronic illness than they do in other countries? McDonald's can't even make the same French fry in France that they make here because France protects their food supply. It was in New Hampshire that I first learned about the PFAS phenomenon, which is absolutely horrifying. I think everybody should be very aware that in the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act just a couple of weeks ago in the House, they stripped out of it. They stripped out of it the PFAS bill. Although I think I saw that Bernie and Ro Khanna are trying to get that back in. Our water is contaminated. There are too many carcinogens in our food. There are too many toxins in our air. There are even economic issues that cause so much stress that contributes to illness. So it's not enough to just talk about how we're going to pay for health care. We have to get real. We have to talk about root cause. Why are so many of us sick? And part of that has to do with the fact that our FDA has been corrupted by too much obeisance to food companies, chemical companies, agribusiness, and so forth. Just like FAA, obviously, was too obeisant to Boeing, or we wouldn't have had those Boeing MAX disasters. FDA was too close to Big Pharma, or we would not have the opioid crisis, where you now have the attorneys general all over this country indicting big pharmaceutical executives for their known predatory practices in over-prescribing and over-manufacturing and confusing the issue of the addictive quality of these narcotics. I just want to end by saying, I know that I didn't say anything here to you today that you don't already know. There might have been a few details that you don't know. But in general, I didn't tell anybody here anything you don't already know. The tenor of this moment is not, wake up, people. The tenor of this moment is not, you need to realize this, people. No, you realize it. The issue of this moment is, what you going to do about it? The issue of this moment is not one of those moments in life where we have to learn something, as so much as we have to own what it is that we've learned. Because if we own it, that means, wow, The people are going to have to step in now. You see, that's what happened with slavery. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, I think we'll end slavery. No, it was, as I said, in large part because of evangelicals in New Hampshire. People woke up. People rose up. People stepped in. And the same with women's suffrage. The U.S. government did not wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. People woke up, people rose up, and people stepped in. And the U.S. government did not wake up one day and say, let's desegregate the American South. People rose up, people woke up, and people stepped in. It is time for that again. I ran for president. I've suspended my campaign, but I'm just as passionate and I'm just as clear that every person in America of goodwill, and I believe that this is a coalition of conscience, as Martin Luther King called it, that speaks to the heart of a person who is a high-minded conservative as much as a high-minded liberal. Something has gone off course. American capitalism has lost its conscience. The American government has lost its conscience. The American people are keeping our conscience too much within the purview of our own individual lives. We're good people, but we need to stand for our goodness within public policy and politics as much as within our own individual lives. That's what it means to have the power. You got to use the power. You got to exercise the power. You got to stand for your power. And I believe it is time for Americans to do that now. Now, Winston Churchill said that you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option. I think with Donald Trump as president, we can see that we've exhausted every other option. But to the president, I would point out, or I'm not sure he would hear me, but I think you do, we can't be great if we're not good. It's time for us to be good in our public policy as well as in our lives. And in order to do that, the people must step in. Thank you very, when we vote, that stuff gets pushed back. We allow this to happen by too much of what I referred to earlier as the chronic disengagement of too many Americans. So if you want it, you're going to have to make it happen. And the beauty of it is you're in New Hampshire. So no New Hampshireite can claim powerlessness.
We need trials. I'm
Pardon?
reminding people, we need trials for 9/11.
Well, a lot of people felt after 9/11 that should have been treated like a criminal issue.
course.
I believe it should have been, and I think the state of New York could have adequately handled it. And that's what should have happened at the time. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just hopeful that, as you said, you're having the baton, and I feel that baton in my hand.
Good.
I feel it, and I said when I drove up here, I took a picture, I said, I'm here for the rally. And I really feel like this is a rallying call, and what has just occurred to me in the last 45 seconds is if each person in this room whose heart jumped at one of those pillars, if we could just have 6 pillars, people, like everybody take on one of those things
So this-
and ride that somehow locally, everywhere.
Right, exactly. So this is what I'm doing. The Marianne 2020 website is still up. If you are not on my website, on my mailing list, I hope you will get onto my mailing list. One of the things that I said here today is that I am as committed to these issues. My commitment to these issues did not end with the suspension of my campaign. So I will be doing. And one of the things that I said in my letter announcing my suspension is that I hope that these ideas will continue and to find seed. Remember, there will not only be a presidential election in this year. There will be senatorial elections. There will be congressional elections. So we will be, Wendy Zoller, my colleague, and I have been talking all morning. We're going to have a conference in Washington, D.C. called the Repair America Conference, where we will be, I would like to invite speakers who will, one presidential candidate already told me this morning that he will be glad to speak at it. This will probably be in March, because that is what it's about. It's about deepening our understanding of the issues so that the issues will no longer be defined or determined for us. That's really got to stop. So I will do everything I can to move forward the conversation. If you have an employee, your business is probably not going to work very well if you only check in on them every 2 years, or every 4 years. And the government is your employee. And it really didn't work for us to only check in every 2 years or 4 years when corporate lobbyists check in with them every hour of every workday. Yes.
Marianne, you have been such an inspiration. I recorded the song, I composed the song Bonnie Barish with Jane Shapiro called God Is Your Vision. This is my gift to you.
Thank you.
We want you to have this. God bless you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm here.
Let's work with
I
the
still have
Department of
to-
Peace. Let's work with the Department of Peace.
That's right. Well, it'll happen if the people demand that it happen. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Well, my husband's a physician and I'm a family nurse practitioner, and I just want to add to your platform about the insurance companies.
Yes.
And so, as my husband was involved in biologics in the pharmaceutical industry, so as much as pharma may have a component to it, really the big underlying factor is insurance companies.
Yeah.
They're killing.
Right.
They're killing healthcare. I mean, it's.
I couldn't
and they're
agree with
getting-
you more.
Yeah.
And to whatever extent they exist, continue to exist at all, they should be heavily regulated.
Absolutely.
Heavily regulated to the point where it won't even be reasonable for them to even continue. You may have to tell them to go away, there just won't be that much money in it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And once again, I was reading a tweet once by a person who I can't remember. I saw he was from Croatia, and he said, "I have never seen a country." Speaking of health insurance companies and big pharma, et cetera, he said, "I've never seen a country that so enables its abusers." We have been trained to think that these people. It's unbelievable. When you have a person who has no conscience, who has no remorse, who has no sense of moral responsibility to anyone other than him or herself, that is a sociopath.
Yes.
If you have an economic system that is driven by the idea that conscience is, I am justified in not considering conscience. I am justified in not considering what the harm this does. That is a sociopathic economic system. And this is what I mean about it's time for us to get very serious here. And one of the things that has been so meaningful for me is the American people that I know would not stand for this in your personal life. Americans don't stand for this in your personal life. That's not who we are as people. Why do we take it collectively? But that's part of being older. Because you remember when, I don't think it's supposed to happen. So in America, I'm not whitewashing American capitalism or American government before the 1980s. I'm not saying we always did the right thing or we were always good. But there was a consensus in the country we were supposed to be good.
Yeah.
We were supposed to be.
Yeah.
So that if we weren't, the conversation did include healthy shame.
Right. Consequences.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, by the way.
Oh,
Thank you for all
thank you.
your
Thank you so
love
much.
and support throughout the years.
Thank you.
And now, and continuing
Thank
forward,
you.
and for inspiring all of us.
Thank you.
My question is, you talked about systems being corrupt, but people generally being good. We all know Democrats are good people. A lot of us here are Democrats. Most of us in the state or in the country are independents. 53 to 56% of every state are independents. Why have you not, what are your thoughts about yourself or others? People like Bernie, people like Bloomberg, people like Tom Steyer, people who seem to have a heart and soul running as independent, because we all know, as you run as an independent, you don't have to put up with the corrupt shenanigans of the Democratic Party. No, us Democrats are not corrupt. The party is as corrupt, if not more, than the Republicans. That can be debatable. What are your thoughts about running or having your colleagues run, Bernie especially, as an independent like he really is?
Okay, so this is an important question, and it demands more than a soundbite response. So let's go back to the beginning. The U.S. Constitution does not mention political parties, and George Washington warned us against them in his farewell address. And he said that they could form factions of men who would be more concerned with their faction than with their country. And I think that most of us, if not all of us, would agree with you, sir. At least to some extent that has occurred. If you look at the history of the United States, third-party voices have been very important. The abolition came from the abolitionist movement. Women's suffrage came from the women's suffrage movement. And Social Security came from the Socialist Party. In my book, Healing the Soul of America, which was the first political book I wrote, I had done quite a bit of research, and I found that it was when George Wallace was so popular during the 1960s, that's when the Democratic Party and the Republican Party formed this, what I believe is to be a pretty unholy alliance, making it very, very difficult for anyone not one of them. You'll remember, perhaps, that it used to be that the presidential debates were held by the League of Women Voters.
Right.
Today, they've been taken over by the two major parties. They call themselves the Debate Commission, like it's some big official something. Right? How it does with your head, okay? So, what has happened, I know when I ran for Congress in Los Angeles a few years ago, I, standing on this principle, ran as an independent and learned how naive that was. It's real hard. It's real hard. The game has been, the rules have been made. Now, right now, then I can only speak for me personally. I personally see the issues of the Democratic and the Republican Party. You got two broken legs and you got two broken arms. But when I look at the agenda of Donald Trump, I see a bullet near the heart. So I would not do anything this year to lure even 10 votes away from the Democrat in 2020. We have to, it's like when Susan B. Anthony got together with Frederick Douglass. You got two evils, but we got to take on the first one first. We got to take first things first. So I think on the other side of this election, I couldn't agree with you more, and I've had my own experience. You're right, but at the same time, we gotta be careful. This has got to be very nuanced. We gotta keep our eyes on what the ultimate ball is. We've got to be really mature right now, and that's how I see it, and that's the answer for now. After this election, we should all. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation. Yes.
The soul of the United States recover would be to reconcile the issues with the American Indians.
Yes, I agree with that. And on once again, if you go to Marianne 2020, when I talked earlier about reparations for slavery, part of the pillars of reparations does include reparative measures towards Native Americans. We should begin with 1863. We signed a treaty to give back the Black Hills of South Dakota. The Savannah Act. We should give back the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux. The vast majority of them. This could be done without any level of disruption to the government of South Dakota. When it comes to slavery and reparations for slavery, we're all very aware of what this was about. It was slavery. With Native Americans, it's a slightly more complicated situation. Neither one is more horrifying than the other, but it's slightly more complicated in that what happened, not only genocide, cultural appropriation, but it has to do with a lot of unfairly negotiated treaties. It has to do with unfairly negotiated treaties. It has to do with treaties that themselves were broken by us. So I think that the work begins with Native Americans, and also many of you are probably aware there's a terrible epidemic of violence and murder regarding Indigenous women and girls right now. I think that the work would certainly begin, if I were president, it would have been the first thing you do is take that picture of Andrew Jackson down from the wall in the Oval Office. It's symbolic, but for whatever other good he did, he is the one who initiated the Trail of Tears, and his picture should not be on the on the wall of the Oval Office. When it comes to Native American tribes, this has to do, I believe, with conversations among tribal elders. They are the poorest of the poor, have some of the most difficult and challenging situations, but I think America needs to listen to them in terms of how they wish to see this repaired, because one does not find that among the tribal elders that the issue is financial remuneration in the form that we would be talking about with reparations.
To touch on the baton passing,
Yes.
I think so many of us don't really know what that looks like, and how do we get involved? And I just want to share a little anecdote that's happened in my life in the past month. If you had told me a month ago that I would have met with my senator for an hour and 45 minutes last week, I would have thought.
How did it feel?
It's frightening at first, but then it felt so empowering.
Yes!
You're just a human that works for us.
That's right. And you're an American woman. Right.
I just encourage everyone to call. If something pisses you off or you're, whatever, call. They work for us, and they're supposed to listen.
The habits of democracy, as de Tocqueville called
And
it.
I never knew this. We aren't taught this,
Well, part of the problem, in all seriousness, is we have 11 states in the United States that do not even do not even require a half a year of study in American civics, American government, and if you're a child and nobody teaches you the Bill of Rights, you don't know as an adult to be horrified when it's under assault. So that is what happened. But people are claiming it now. I think everybody needs, I don't know if you have any books here like, American History for Dummies or American Government for Dummies. Those things exist. But you're absolutely right. And that's why I hope, if you are interested, you have what you said, what does it look like? Well, what it looks like specifically for you are, I don't need to tell anybody in New Hampshire how much power you have. It's been very moving. You know how much power you have, and the people of Iowa know how much power they have. The decision that you make in your primary will be possibly consequential for the world. So you will be doing, I'm sure, your due diligence. You'll be listening to candidates throughout this month. You will be attending town halls. And should you feel moved, you will raise your hand and say, what are you going to do to rescue all those at-risk kids? Or what do you think about a Department of Peace? Or what are you going to do, does your healthcare system that you're talking about include integrative models? I mean, whatever I might have mentioned or that might be that you see on my website or from someone else. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything I brought up tonight, just anything you care about. Don't just sit there and let them define for you the multiple choice questions. That's all I'm saying. And that's what it looks like. Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. We have been mentally trained in this country to expect too little from our government. There's been a power inversion. We have forgotten they work for us. To some extent we weren't taught, and to a large extent we found it convenient not to have to think about these things because it's painful to think about some of these things. So we need to all take responsibility. And basically I think that's the issue, is to know that democracy does not just give us rights, it gives us the responsibility. And it's that whole Teddy Roosevelt quote about being in the arena. Every citizen should be in the arena, and every citizen should consider being an active citizen as part of a well-lived life. And I'll tell you something, I've been in New Hampshire enough last year, to know you have in New Hampshire what they have in every state. You have as many of these issues playing out on the state level and on the local levels as we have it in Washington. That's why I always said throughout my campaign, I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and co-create with you. I want to do in Washington what you need to do right here. That is the revolution that's going to change this country.